was under 500. So, like I said, very competitive. Let's start with the top, of course, as always, with the Baltimore Ravens. They were 13-4 last season. Unfortunately, lost to the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. It was a tough game for them, if people remember. Nonetheless, in terms of losses, lost quite a bit, starting with defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald, who was a big part of that defense that they had last season. So we'll see if that will affect them. Also, back at quarterback Tyler Huntley, who's always been pretty solid and serviceable for them. He has left. Running backs Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins also gone via free agency. Wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. and Devin Duvernay. And then a couple losses on the O-line in offensive tackle Morgan Moses, guard John Simpson, and guard Kevin Zeitler. And then on defense, they also lost edge rusher Jadeveon Clowney, as well as linebacker Patrick Queen on that front seven. And then in secondary, cornerbacks Ronald Darby and Rock Ya-Sin as well. And then in terms of additions, just a few, but a couple, obviously the big one being running back Derrick Henry, brought him in to be their bell cow, as well as offensive lineman Josh Jones, who's kind of bumped around a couple of spots but been serviceable, as well as safety Eddie Jackson. That was a little bit more recently into training or into the preseason. And then draft-wise, first round went cornerback Nate Wiggins out of Clemson and at pick 30. And then in the second round at offensive tackle went Roger Rosengarten out of Washington. And then third round also went edge rusher Adisa Isaac out of Penn State with pick 93. And then in terms of who they replaced Mike Macdonald with, their former defensive coordinator, they brought up Zach Orr, who was a linebacker for them for a while. Obviously, his days are done, unfortunately. But obviously now coaching, so we'll see what impact he can have on that defense. As this team kind of going to a little bit of reshuffle. Always tough to do so. I mean, you guys kind of have to do so in this league. But what are your thoughts on the Ravens heading into this season, John?
The Ravens, I mean, clearly last year proved to be one of the best teams in the league. They do lose a lot of players, which does interest me in terms of their depth. I mean, guys like Patrick Queen, Jadeveon Clowney, Kevin Zeitler, even people like, Devin Duvernay, who had moments for them, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. Like, they lose a lot of depth pieces. But at the same time, if there's anything we've always praised the Ravens for, it's their ability to draft over the years. And I do think that some of the young pieces that they have drafted can certainly be impact players, coming into this season. I'm talking about, you lose someone like Gus Edwards, but obviously they add Derrick Henry, so they'll get an upgraded starter. But maybe someone like Keaton Mitchell, who had moments last year when he does return from injury, can be sort of that, change of pace back that Gus was, obviously in a different way because Gus is more of a power back. But Gus was kind of the thunder to J.K. Dobbins' lightning. Now Derrick Henry can be the big power back. Maybe Keaton Mitchell can be the explosive guy. Even further examples, maybe some young receivers like a Tylan Wallace, who they drafted a couple of years, can start to fill in some of those maybe explosive plays that someone like Duvernay is not going to be having. I think that he's even lined up on the depth chart in terms of special teams, Tylan Wallace, so maybe he can replace some of those reps that Duvernay had. I'm just very interested to see how some of the young guys that they've drafted over the years can continue to develop, even in certain spots where, maybe they're not necessarily weak because they lost, certain people like a Dafe Owe, a Travis Jones. Kyle Hampton was obviously a stud last year. How much better can he be? I just think there's, even at corner, Jalen Amwar Davis, the guy that you were really a big fan of, he was, having some moments last year. So I'm interested to see how the Ravens, and specifically the guys they've drafted over the last couple of years can really help this team. Overall, I still expect them to be one of the best teams in the league on offense. When you have a guy like Lamar Jackson, he's proven that even despite a lesser wide receiver room, even despite injuries to guys like Mark Andrews or Ronnie Stanley, he's still able to produce. So, knock on wood, barring health for those guys this year, I think I see no reason why the Ravens can't continue to be as strong as they've always been. And I think that the addition of Derrick Henry could also take some of that pressure off of Lamar, because we've seen how good Derrick Henry has been, even despite the fact that, maybe he's getting older and he's declining a little bit. If any running back in the league has continued to push Father Time back as far as you possibly can, it's been Derrick Henry so far. So, I see no reason for the Ravens to not continue to be one of the top teams in the AFC and challenging the Chiefs for the potential Super Bowl spot to represent the conference.
Yeah, I still expect them to be a playoff contender. I do have one of my main concerns for the Ravens is going to be losses on the offensive line. We know Ronnie Stanley's good, but health, like you already alluded to, has been a concern for him. And then especially, you just never know. Like those guys coming up right now, they're at least on their site. This could change, but their projected depth chart at the guards, I worry about both of them, Andrew Voorhees and Daniel Faalele. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Daniel. But kind of unproven commodities. And we kind of seen their offense like last year. It helped their offense kind of got off to a slow start, but found their way. And once again, this is year 2 of Todd Monken as their OC. So could teams, has he adjusted enough? Has he progressed his offense enough? Because obviously teams will be looking at what he did last year to help open up that pass offense more. But for the first time in a bit, the wide receiver room, I'm not too concerned about. We saw Zay Flowers had moments. I know he had a couple of not great decisions in the conference championship game that maybe cost them. With the taunting penalty. I think he had a fumble as well. But we know he's talented. And then hopefully Rashad Bateman. They've been glowing about Bateman this offseason. And obviously they expect him to fill in that kind of number two role. So we'll see if he can do so. And then on the defensive side, my worry too would be, which once again, like you alluded to, Baltimore's been great at, kind of developing guys. People forget Judon, took him a couple of years to get going there. Even Zadarius Smith didn't really get going until like his contract year, and then left to Green Bay and, still producing. So we'll see if Odafe Owe or your guy, David Ojabo, can get going on the edge for them since they lost. They brought in Clowney last year and he actually overperformed. But obviously he left. So, and then my only other concern too would be behind Roquan Smith, because Patrick Queen was really solid behind Roquan. Obviously Roquan was, the stud that they were hoping Patrick would be. He wasn't that guy, but still Patrick Queen was a really good second linebacker to Roquan. Now they're relying on Trenton Simpson. So we'll see if he can step up to the plate. And then, we'll see if some of these young corners can fill in behind Marlon Humphrey, who Marlon's always been solid, but you mentioned Father Time with Derrick Henry. It can strike at any time, and we'll see if Marlon can and the rest of the defensive back room can step up. Especially if the front seven, those edge rushers that I mentioned, aren't getting home, aren't creating pressure, and making life difficult for the opposing team. But nonetheless, still like we mentioned, still have some talent around to play with. And I assume, Zach, this team will still be in playoff contention. Just a matter of, okay, how do they look like? How dominant are they going into the postseason? Of course, how healthy they are, but that kind of applies to every team. It'll be interesting to see if the offense can take a step forward. The whole Derrick Henry, Lamar dynamic. I know everyone's expecting it to go great, but you just never know. And especially, like I said, with that O-line, I just have concerns against the elite of the elite. But that's one of those things that we'll just have to see how they play throughout the season. And, like I said, it could be proven wrong. Offensive line is always tough for us outsiders. Like I mentioned, I feel like I mentioned this last year, but that's just one of those things that really it's only like the team kind of knows how they feel about their depth at O-line. So we'll see, if the Ravens can build off last season, maybe get over that hump in the playoffs and finally punch their ticket to the Super Bowl and such. But nonetheless, we expect them to be in the conversation in terms of relevancy for the Super Bowl and playoffs. So we'll see.